Remote access risk in the field. You can see this is good one also. Somebody during a NERC CIP audit, somebody discovered an improperly secured vendor VPN connection that have been left open after maintenance. This happens a lot. A vendor comes to your environment, you open a port, a security port, which is just an opening like, okay, you have access to this port to check my system. He or she finishes the maintenance work and you forget to lock that port after they leave, you know? So that's a big one. So the risk is that, yes, in good faith, the person came in, did their work, they're out. But what's your process like to now shut it off once they leave, you know? And sometimes you might realize it's been open for a year. Nobody is even aware of it, you know? So there must be a system in your environment to make sure we can easily identify such risk, you know, big one. Some risk factor in this scenario, there was lack of MFA, which is a big one out there. No session monitoring, no monitoring or recording the activities. There was excessive access, and there was a missing termination process for vendor access, meaning we are not saying we're not going to give vendor access, but we're saying how do we terminate those vendors once they are done with their maintenance work? And that was a missing piece in this case, right? So, all right. So let's see. Authenticated communication, again, like anything else, for all your devices, PLCs, HMI, there must be appropriate authentication. It does not matter whatever access you're trying to get, how do we authenticate it? As a matter of fact, now within OT space, we're also encouraging zero trust and MFA. So you might see a lot of zero trust and MFA now, even within OT space, okay? Access enforcement here during a NERC CIP audit, another one, an unauthorized remote access was discovered during a major transmission operation, you know? So the engineers created a bypass for maintenance access. And this happens a lot. People just bypass the regular process. And when we do an audit, this can be easily found, you know? So there was no documentation in terms of their connection to corporate network. And that's a potential violation of CIP 005 access control. And that can easily lead to a fine of $1 million. If they find you, you know, if it's a willful negligence, they could really come after you, you know? But the investigation in this case realized a systematic issue. You know, overly restrictive access control made people to find a workaround. That's why at times you have to have a process that is clean enough to avoid circumventing it. If there are so many layers of approval, people will find a way around it, right? If there is insufficient monitoring of your network, that's a potential gap. There is no streamline of emergency access process. If everything is emergency, then it means there's a gap somewhere. Then poor security awareness program for this organization also. Okay. Another incident here was external remote service attack. In this case, um, an electric utility, they got attacked. It's a sophisticated attack. And it started with overexposure of their VPN with single factor authentication. The attacker leveraged their DMZ service to pivot towards OT. And the attack was detected during active reconnaissance of their system. Incident response was activated afterwards. So this is quite common than we think it is. The good thing about OT many times is that it might not be immediately obvious, but there's so much attack happening at OT level. You know, you may not notice it because sometimes it's not like they can steal data, right? So the impact is not as crazy like your IT in that from that perspective. But at the same time, it can lead to safety concern and slow down your operation in general. So that's also a big one. Um, so another one here was just a case where man evidence process breakdown. In this case, there was an audit finding, large US utility failed NERC CIP due to inadequate documentation and evidence tracking. So another thing is for most of the activities around NERC CIP, we have to keep buttressing the need to document all the time, especially around change management, around access review, around tracking your security patches. Those are things that we have to always do all the time. Um, Another one here was after an audit was failed, what are the key things around remediations in general? Workforce retraining, documentation overhaul, governance enhancement, technology deployment. So this would be some general things people do when there was, if there's a fail in terms of next SIP or OT generally. Retraining is a big one out there. Cultural challenges in general, a big one I've seen is a lack of alignment between your IT and OT and your general business unit. Historically, IT is, excuse me. So IT is on its own doing their thing, right? They just do their thing, they do the IT well, their servers, infrastructure, application, security. OT is in a different world of frame of mind. They are more focused on the operation, on safety. They are not too, so sometimes it's easy to see the obvious disconnection. So it's important to build a culture of understanding of the collaboration between your IT and OT and the business unit to know that we work hand in hand together. Sometimes we leverage technology from each other. And when things overlap, we know in our environment. Then you can tell OT is production first mentality, you know, it's strictly production first. So we have to figure a way to work with cross-functional team and ultimately achieve the result. In general, some of those key things we have to think about in this OT program, baseline assessment, which we're going to do today, asset inventory and risk matrix, that's a big one. Quarterly progress tracking, these are things that are done to track progress in an OT shop in general. You might hear the word CIARA, for those of us in that likes music, you might, is this CIARA? So CIARA means cyber industrial automated risk assessment. So there's always equally a risk assessment performed in the world of OT also. Just like your regular IT, it's very similar in nature. We have to do a risk assessment to understand what are those threats, the likelihood of those attacks, and the control effectiveness we have. We rank those risks, then we can have a better picture of where we stand as an organization in general. We also have end value management for compliance tracking around next SIP. So again, don't stress this. Your leadership and management, they would have developed something around this already, around the EVM. And this is just to help to track your compliance in general, because they understand this can lead to severe fines. So people, excuse me, people they take this serious. Give me a second, please. All right. So many times your leadership would definitely have a model they've built around EVM. You and I will not care about this really. It's just a way to track differently compliance within your next SIP in your organization. So they can see the schedule performance, cost performance, and different metrics within the organization. What are some challenges integrating IT and OT teams? Culture is a big one. One thing I want you to put in mind, if anything to take away from this, is IT focus a lot on confidentiality, right? And rapid patching. OT, their priority is always availability. Can we all type this? IT, confidentiality, OT, availability. OT, their focus is our system should be available. That's the focus, right? You and I know that, okay, availability means we don't shut down operation. That means our bonus is not delayed. Let's keep that part aside, right? But it's just the fact of the process too. So your OT plant manager will not even, he or she will not want that conversation around, don't mess with my plant for any reason, right? And it's really the core of our business too, let's be honest. Because if you're a Walmart, a CVS, a craft food, whatever production you're doing, no matter how great your IT is, what brings the money is the plant, right? Let's be honest. So they have bragging rights. As a matter of fact, they look at us IT as, you know, cost centers. They're just incurring cost. All you know is buy server, buy this, buy that. They feel they're the ones making money, which you can make a case they're the ones making money because all of what we are selling to our customers comes from the plant at one form or the other. So fair point. But those are the big things. Technical knowledge gap also, I'll tell you, skills around OT is rare. So it's a rare skill, which is amazing. Project impact, sometimes your standard IT policy will not apply to your OT policy. So you might have to implement and develop procedures and policies around some of your OT environment too. Some might overlap, but you might be adaptive to implement some policies around your OT shop. Then successful resolution, make sure you have integration meeting with your IT and OT team, especially to get everybody ready in case there's an incident so people can respond appropriately ultimately also. Zone and conduit modeling example. So in this case was an example of a water treatment, that implemented ISA 62443. They divided their facility into 7 security zones based on their functional requirement of those facility, and it protected 12 programmable logical controllers, which is just those softwares, machines that are attached to your robotics or any of your industrial machines. Then the HMI are just those big screens, so it helps you to protect all their key devices, establish strict conduit rules for interzone communication. But anyway, that's the result in this case was 73% reduction in available attack paths. So implementing and mapping your security control to 62443 is always a huge piece for us in OT. Some good practices in terms of device hardening, port handling. This was a good one for oil and gas. There's disabled unused ports on all endpoints. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say we are saying if you are not using a port, PORT, disable it because you are just exposing yourself to potential threats. So if you are not using a port, disable it. Legacy HMI protection. In this case, we can apply application allow listing instead of traditional antivirus on Windows XP based HMI system. So you can imagine even the thought of using XP, which is an old operating system in general. So you just want to make sure you have a process in place that when there are integration with newer models, you've prepared your organization to integrate both together in a way that would not cause further security threats. Then there's secure by default setting, where you implement automated baseline configuration management in your organization also. Access control list management. Again, in general, this is our standard is access control. In this case, a pipeline operator implemented a robust access control list management program. Every month, they have ACL review across all their OT security zones, quarterly privilege access review. It's similar to our normal access control, right? In this case, it's just for operation technology. That's it. So it's just your standard access control. But in this case, so it's like we do access review, quarterly privilege access review, then making sure we have a well integrated onboarding offboarding of your contractor. So it's the same thing for IT. It's not really much of a difference beside the fact that our vendors in OT, we still need to have a well clear onboarding and offboarding process for them. Continuous monitoring, standard, same thing. Most of those tools will be similar in nature. There are some vendors that are more aligned to OT. So you might hear the word ARMIS, ARMIS. Splunk also still work here, but there are some vendors that are very OT specific. Most people are now trying to be IT and OT. So you might see Splunk and Exabeam, even your Curators, your Qualys. A couple of those vendors still try to play with OT as much as possible. Now, for industrial protocols, can we all type Modbus and DNP3? Can we all type this Modbus, MOD, BUS, and DNP3? Can we all type it? And don't stress it. The way we have protocols in IT, popular one, HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, SFTP, Telnet. In OT, they have some common one. Modbus is a big one. Modbus. Then there is DNP3. If you know those two, you're good for a start. The other ones are mostly protocols developed by the vendors, right? So if Microsoft or Siemens, in this case, mostly Rockwell Automation, Honeywell, any of these big operation technology vendors, they come up with their own protocol for their own equipment also. So that's the gist of that. All right, let me rush this. Patch management. This is similar to our regular patching. It's not different. The only thing is that sometimes you might have legacy system that you cannot patch. So in those cases, what do? Their whole system, they don't have patching. You just have to make sure you isolate those network in a way that nobody has access to them to potentially inject virus in them. Yeah, but yeah. Risk assessment, the same model around risk assessment we do in our regular risk assessment is the same thing. You look at the likelihood, the impact, and the overall risk in general. So the same thing. Audit preparation, these are just some general your discovery, evidence management, collecting evidence, then having your subject matter experts review them. Third party risk issue. At the end of the day, even though we are working on OT, the same challenge we have in IT will be similar in OT in terms of third party, right? Want to make sure that your third party, you still provide oversight to them. Their critical vulnerability have been addressed. Um, so let me give an example. This is a case study that says a manufacturing company discovered a vendor network equipment was missing firmware updated during a routine security scan. So their recent firmware has not been deployed to my network in a scan that I did. So let's say there's firmware, the most recent one is in August 2025. I did a scan and I realized they've not installed the new updates to my network, right? And so I'll just call it out that, hey, the last scan you made was in March and we have that, but your recent update has not been installed in our system. So there should be a way we can track our third party, what they're doing, if they're installing our patches well, if they're following our best practices in general. So the same third party risk management issue will come in here. Incident response plan, same model. If there's an incident, the process around detection, our response, our resolution and reporting, should be well spelled out. As a matter of fact, incident response in IT and OT would have similar parts. The differences might be, let me ask you, what do you think the difference would be if I ask you IT, OT, incident response, what might be the differences? Let me ask you. Just go ahead and tell me. If I ask you what might be different between incident response in IT and incident response in OT, what might be some difference in your opinion? It's not a tricky thing, question, but it's something you're surprised it's not a big deal. Let me just see what your thoughts are. Safety, speed of resolution. Okay. All right. I mean, some of the big ones out there typically would be, think about it. The notification time might be a little bit different, depends on the location. Sometimes it might be specific to the vendors we would have to contact. Sometimes it might be the kind of third party I'm dealing with, right? Might be different. Because in this case, it's not like your, oh, Microsoft, AWS, Salesforce, that they have a well clear way of pinging into my network and trying to address issue. If it's OT, sometimes the vendor have to physically fly down and check stuff for you, right? So you might see some slight difference around communication and your playbook will be different for sure because the playbook we use for antivirus in or malware in your IT will be different from malware impacting a PLC, right? So the playbook will be different a little bit. They would have different playbook for how we resolve issues we have in the enterprise IT and how we resolve issue in their playbook in your OT environment. So there will be some slight difference there for sure. All right. Ransomware scenario, remember again, this is where your tabletop comes in. So every one of those tabletop is just going to have a playbook. Can we type playbook, everybody? Playbook will be like your script for resolving issue for each one of those key risk areas. It might be malware, ransomware, you know, advanced persistent test threats, anything that is you think is common, you should have a playbook for them, you know, to resolve those ones specifically also. All right. Remember again, some of those use cases, I'll just skip it because you can read that up, right? Also, we have to think of automation. Automation is always big in general. Training and awareness, the culture of training, you cannot go wrong with that. Supply chain is a big one because now we're talking about your supplier requirements. How would we deal with pre-deployment assessment before you bring in the supplier? Are we sure we've tested all their OT device before we install it? What about our firmware? What about the contractual control, their service level agreement, the vendors? Then how do we monitor this vendor? Because remember, the vendors in IT and OT are slightly different in terms of their mindset, their approach. Your OT vendors are more personal. They are more, I think they are closer to you than your vendors in IT. And that's because it's like an elitist group. It's not like you're a lot. If you're manufacturing cars, for example, it's not like we're going to have 1,000 of people manufacturing cars, right? So they know each other well. It's a small network of people, you know? Or if you're maintaining nuclear stations or bulk electric systems, it's not like we have thousands of nuclear stations everywhere, right? It will be a few and pick that you know each other, sort of. The network is not as big as IT, which has its benefit also. Legacy system constraint, we've talked about this before. Many times, if you have old unsupported systems, you have to deal with that challenge and make sure there are no known vulnerabilities around it. Segmentation is a big one. We talk about it. Um, you check the effectiveness of those segmentation. This is just to track that in general. Some metrics for tracking compliance progress. Schedule Performance Index, XPI, Cost Performance Index. This measures budget efficiency for security control, compliance percentage, measure required satisfaction versus total applicable, risk reduction, measure security posture improvement. This is going to be done by your leadership, of course, but just to give you a heads up on what typically is measured in general. What do we do in terms of dealing with repeat audit findings? If it continues in more than 3 consecutive audits, then naturally we have to do a root cause analysis, escalation process, accountability model. Anytime you see stuff like this, mostly you know that they have some other deeper issue they are dealing with. Maybe human resource issue, budgetary constraints, personnel constraint, right? So those are things that probably everybody's aware of and they've accepted that risk anyway. And people just understand, look, there's nothing we can do. We know about this risk. For now, we can't do much. So industrial DMZ implementation is a good one to think about. A manufacturing company implemented a comprehensive industrial DMZ architecture. Here's the recommendation. Place all remote access and historian traffic in DMZ. Everything around somebody trying to remotely log in and their historian traffic, keep it in DMZ. Can we all type historian equals to OT database? Can we all type that real quick? You might hear that word historian, historian, historian. It's not history. The way, I'm not talking of a historian from a history point of view. We call database in OT historian. So you might hear the word historian, historian. It's just the way we have Oracle database in that world in IT. And we have historian as our database so it stores all this PLC information, HMI, process, industrial control process data in historian data. So that's what it is there. So we put all our remote access and historian in DMZ, okay, demilitarized zone. We have data diodes for one-way information flow where appropriate. We deploy application layer gateway for protocol validation. We establish jump servers with enhanced login and authentications. We segregate critical and non-critical assets into separate security zones. So the idea with this is just you're segmenting the network in a way that, if there was a breach somewhere, you can know that not every part of your network is affected immediately in real time. So that's the idea around industrial DMZ in general. And IDMZ, I'll tell you, reality is that is a little bit one of those areas that is quite um, controversial in terms of a lot of back and forth. People will challenge the approach. So you have to understand the architecture of the environment before you implement an appropriate industrial DMZ. At the minimum, you want to make sure you look at the way information flows in that environment. Don't overthink it. All I'm saying is that if data is coming in from somewhere, where is the data going to? Is there security around how the data is going out and coming in? What kind of data are we storing? Based on what we are storing, what is the security around it? So it's just the way we are putting security around the flow of information, that's all, at the end of the day. But every environment is different. So the way you put information or put your security depends on how data flow, information flows within your environment. So you'll see a lot of people, they will say security architecture. How do you architect the flow of information or data? Because that will determine the way I can recommend how we can protect different layers across our infrastructure. Okay, change management. This is the same thing, the normal change management. I'll skip this. So it's just this time around is for OT. How do you make sure that if there are changes made, We have a process to track those changes. And do we test those changes? Do we have a change advisory board with OT representation there? And so typical. Continuous improvement, this is going to be the same thing around annual risk assessment. If there's a need to make a evaluation of your control, track your security in general, implement effectiveness of your control, and review it at all times also. This is mapping your next SIP to ISA 62443. You can see here, we just did a simple mapping here. Asset identification, SIP 002 maps to 6244332-1. So next SIP still maps to ISA 62443. Remember, next SIP is unique to utility. 62443 is more global. So really, I can make a case that you can spin off next SIP from 62443, technically. So I just mapped it together to show you what that could look like. Some general governance model that work in OT. I think this applies to everything really. Whether it's OT or IT, there should be executive sponsor. Your leadership must be involved. There should be a security steering committee, where we have cross-functional leadership providing strategic direction and guidance. That's why I mentioned earlier on. If you go to an OT team and you tell them about you, if you and I show up, they will chase us out. Their leadership will be the one to drive it, really. You can't even show your face. So they have to be the ones pushing the changes. You and I cannot show up because they will kick us out so quick because they don't have time for you messing up with the operation. So their leadership will be the one pushing, then you just show up and do the work, at the end of the day. Um, Working groups, of course, then your execution team or site implementation team. I'll skip some of these use cases. You can read them, but these are just talking about some NEXIP project on, penalties that exceeded $2.5 million for Midwestern. Um, they had a audit failure and it was 13 severe finding across their SIP standard. That's a big one. Another one was recovery from security breach here. A manufacturing company that had a breach, they had financial impact was 3.8 million. The disruption lasted for 37 hours. Then, of course, they responded, investigated, restored, and security upgrades were made. So that's a good one. Lesson from the field, common pitfall, over reliance on manual control. Let's try and run from that. Underestimating legacy exposure, that's a big one. IT OT culture friction, big one. Compliance versus security mindset. So that's also a big one in general. Those are the big one. What works best practice for OT in general? Always map your assets, like everything we do, asset mapping. Risk-based segmentation, build a culture of security, automate your compliance when you can, continuously monitor and regularly test, do tabletop exercise all the time. And these are some general use cases. You can read those ones. Some general success factor, executive buying, continuous monitoring, risk-based approach, workforce engagement, annual incident response testing, partnership with your vendors. Emerging challenges, AI and OT. I think this applies to everything we know already. With OT and AI now, AI is just going to make it much more easy to detect and to monitor AI OT environment. The challenge will be also, a lot of false positive, a lot of potential advanced persistent threats to AI now, to OT with AI models. So with the benefit comes a lot of risk also, even with OT. Reporting at the end of the day for your leadership, monthly check, have a good reporting mechanism, educate your board, have a good way to translate the technical jargon to business terms and language for your team. Um, like anything, OT cyber insurance, because of an audit that failed in this OT shop, their cyber premium increased by 22%. And that's typical. If you fail some of these tests, or you have an audit finding, your premium will just jump crazy at that point in time. Some regulatory development in general, we have NIS2 directive, European, we have Critical Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and we have our 62443 here. CISA is the big one out there for those of us in OT. We follow up with them a lot. So monitoring tools in OT, big one. Clarity is a big one. Noxomi is a big one. Honeywell, Dragos, GRC platform, typical ones. RSA, Metric, Logic Manager, ServiceNow. Then we have vulnerability management tools like Tenables, Armis, CyberX, Valve Industrial, quite a number of them out there. So anyway, a lot of tools out there. Building sustainable security program, clear ownership, institutionalize your lessons, annual review, escalation paths. These are some good practices out there. All right, so that's really the gist of it. Final one before we bounce. What does the term defense in depth refers to? What does the term defense in depth refers to? Awesome. All right, cool. All right, winner for today. Third place, Abby. Second place, Samuel in the house. Our undisputed champion of the world. Let's give it up for Alfred Blue. And our runner-up, AI Red and Sun Blue. All right, awesome job, folks.